Howdy, and welcome to the Legal Hour with Bailey and Gallion. Coming to you today from the Legal Cafe here at the corner of Main and First Street in beautiful downtown Fort Worth, just across the street from the antique courthouse that we're all so proud of. And today I'm talking to James Bridge. Mr. Bridge is the COO of our law firm Bailey and Gallion. He's a quite accomplished attorney and now is leading the firm in terms of how we handle things and moving forward into the coming years. James, how did you decide you wanted to be a lawyer?
Well, you know, like most people, I kind of just fell into the profession. I graduated from TCU and was like, what are you going to do for your life? And said, well, why not more education? So I went to law school, and next thing I know, I'm almost 28 years later.
There you go. There you go. What area of the law did you start out in?
I've actually always been in a plaintiff side of the bar. I started off working EEOC, which is Equal Employment Opportunity Commission cases, working with the Postal Service employees and Western Currency Facility here in Fort Worth, which prints a lot of the U.S. currency.
Okay. So you've been on the side helping people?
Forever.
Okay, and that's kind of a calling. There's so many different areas of the law, and I do find, for example, with myself, I started out in one field and kind of fell into another, and no, you're going to go do this for a while now, and that sort of thing. But there's a certain benefit in being able to do what you really want to do and to be able to help people.
Right.
You know, because lawyers and used car salesmen are the butt of a lot of jokes.
Correct.
And so it's nice to feel good about what you're doing. You are right now the COO of the largest consumer law firm in Texas. What motivated you to make that transition out of practicing at the courthouse every day and deciding to take on a leadership mantle?
Well, again, I just kind of fell into it a little bit. I was at another firm and was given an opportunity for a leadership position, and I ran with it, and I enjoyed it. I enjoy interacting with people and understanding what they're coming from and trying to help them be a better lawyer themselves.
Okay. Well, you know, there's a big difference, and the bar is just now, I think, starting to recognize it. But there's a big difference in practicing law and practicing law for profit. Okay? When I went to law school, they taught me about, habeas corpus and things like that. They didn't give me any instructions or any ideas on how to do it for a living.
That is correct.
So what would you say is the hardest thing for lawyers to learn in terms of how to manage a legal practice?
Well, the hardest part is learning to manage themselves. Mm-hmm. That is the first key to anything. If you can't manage yourself, you can't manage a case. And so part of that is just to learn time management and how to get into a case, to understand that if you put too much time into it, you're overextending yourself, and you put too little time into it, you're not doing well for the client. So there's a happy median in between there, but that just comes with experience, and that also comes with hopefully having a mentor to give them an idea of what to expect and what not to, hopefully not what not to do, actually.
Yeah. Well, and let's face it, some of our brethren have some pretty sizable egos. And I would think that would have to be a challenge for you on a daily basis to deal with these big ego people.
I've always said it's sort of like herding cats a little bit. Mm-hmm. Everybody has a different idea of how they want to practice law, but we have a particular way. We call it the Bailey and Gallion way, mm-hmm. and we want to make sure that they continue on that path and do what they're supposed to be doing, which is what our lawyers are supposed to be doing, is advocating for the client.
Mm-hmm. And listening to the client. And it's hard. We were chatting before this came on board. There's a certain level of professional detachment that you have to maintain as an attorney so that you don't get sucked into the vortex of the bad feelings that are going on between the parties, so you can keep your objectivity.
Right.
How do you counsel folks to figure out that balance?
Well, I mean, there's obviously at the end of the day, you understand that it's not your legal problem, it is the client's legal problem, and address it understanding from that angle. And going forward, every time you get into a case, and as we were discussing earlier, sometimes you get down to the courthouse and you take it personally because it's your argument and you think it's your case, but it is your case as an attorney, but it's not your case as the participant. And if you put yourself in the participant's shoes, you're always going to get crosswise.
Yeah, and cases get really emotional, and that's the case in virtually every area of the practice of law. I found in my career that business litigation was actually a little easier in that regard, because you have board members saying, oh, is this a profitable exercise for us to be doing? And the emotions didn't run quite so deep.
Right.
But if you're dealing with people who've been injured, or someone who's going through a family law matter, or a probate matter where someone they love passed away, the emotions can run so deep that the clients are really relying on you to be the voice of reason and not get disabled, if you will, by emotions running.
You know, that's absolutely true. You know, part of what you have to realize, and what lawyers need to realize, and especially young lawyers, is that what is unique for the client, meaning what is an experience that they hopefully will never have to go through again, but it's a traumatic part of their life at that moment. And so it's unique to them, but it's routine for us. And so we've got to make sure that we keep that in mind, that we have to keep advocating for them and not get into their shoes as part of what the emotion part of it is. But you still want to make sure that you're doing all the things that you're supposed to be doing by making sure that the arguments that they're asking you to do is incorporated. And then part of that as well is, if you look at every attorney's license, it says attorney and counselor at law.
Okay.
And counselor at law, I take that seriously, and I try to impart that to the lawyers, is because we're also counseling them. We're counseling them, as you mentioned, where they're at the worst time of their lives. They're looking for direction, and they're wanting to know what's going on, and you got to tell it to them in layman's terms. I remember back when I first started my career, I was trying to be by the book, doom, everything, and people was like, well, you're talking to me like a lawyer. Talk to me like you're my friend. Right. And you can't really talk to them like you're friends, but you can certainly talk to them as on that level, right? And so that's where the counseling part comes in, because people sometimes will get emotional, right? And if you're in a personal injury case, it might be you have a lifelong injury that's going to be with you for the rest of your life. And if you're going through a divorce, it's, you're trying to get a divorce and do the right thing, but the other side doesn't necessarily believe what you believe.
Right.
And that can get crosswise and add to litigation.
Sometimes, because I counsel people, you'd really like an experienced attorney, one who's experienced in the area that you're actually working in right now. And I have to remind young attorneys from time to time, this may be one of 15 cases just like this that you have, but it's your client's only case. Correct. And it's the most important case in his life. And you have to spend the time. I tell my clients there's no such thing as a silly question, because sometimes, and I know this has got to be true in your areas of expertise, where there's a general rule and then there's 147 exceptions. And so that's why I think they think sometimes we're double talking them.
Right.
Well, almost, but, and having to do that. I do think that it's a balancing act between empathy with your client and keeping their feet on the ground and cultivating some reasonable expectations for folks. Right. And in particularly in situations where their bodies or their livelihoods have been jeopardized by a terrible accident, it's life or death for these people, and they need to know you're on their side, but by the same token, you don't want to be the guy who's telling them what they want to hear. And what advice would you give folks when they're shopping for a lawyer?
Well, just like anything, you would not want to hire a lawyer from the first time you walked in the door. Usually you want to meet with several different lawyers to find out what style and what personality, because it's really a personality. I mean, the law is the law, right? There's nuances to it, right? Sure. And there's different arguments you can make and maybe make new law. But most of the time, the law is pretty well settled. And so if you can't work with your lawyer and you don't have that personality connection with them, then it will not be an experience that you will appreciate. I think that's most important. It's just like all relationships in life. If you enjoy the people that you're with, then you can accomplish more. You can get things done at the scale and the time that you expect it to be done. But if you come in with an attitude that the lawyer is smarter than you, and the lawyer thinks they're smarter than you, and sometimes that might be the case.
Or acts like it.
Or acts like it.
Right.
But then that becomes a problem, and I see that a lot. Not necessarily, I saw it earlier in my career when, young lawyers, when they get out and they're always like, let's sue everybody, and hear me roar. And that only goes so far. That goes about 2 or 3 years, and then you go in front of a judge and the judge kind of whips you upside the head, and that's the end of that. So, you got to make sure that you have the personality of the lawyer and you mesh.
There's a difference between zealous advocacy and not reading the rules, okay?
Right.
When someone says, well, I want his name tattooed on her forehead. Well, the court's not going to order that. Why are we even talking about stuff? But people do get really riled up, and sometimes they need to take a breath and take a step back. And
kind of reminds me of the movie A Few Good Men.
Yeah.
Where I can't remember the female lead actress, but she was objecting, and the judge kept overruling, and she says, "I strenuously object." And it's like, no, there is a definite yes or no answer to most questions.
Right. What kind of advice would you give young lawyers who are thinking about joining the field or trying to decide where in the field they might want to land?
Well, the advice I would give them is pretty straightforward. Do what you enjoy. And if you get into an area of law that you don't enjoy, express that to somebody. Tell that to somebody. I remember my first day as a lawyer, I was asked to go down and defend a deposition for a family law case. And I got down there and I did my duty and I did what I was supposed to do. And 3 hours later, I came back to the office and said, I don't want to do family law ever again. And I can tell you, I have not done any family law since then. And so if you get into something that you don't like, or you don't think you see yourself in that future, then it's okay to say, you know what, I want to try something different. Because at your early stages of your career, and you can attest to this, you did business law and now you're doing family law.
I had that moment. I had to go cover for a bankruptcy hearing in front of a particularly frightening judge. And I made it through by the skin of my teeth, and everything turned out great. And I was promising to myself I'd never darken these doors again as I was leaving. It was gut-wrenching because I was scared.
Right.
And some of these judges can scare the willy out of you. True. One of the things that we do at Bailey and Gallion, and I know this is one of your favorite things about Bailey and Gallion, is that we provide free interviews for people to come in and chat. Here we are at the Legal Cafe. You can come in, have a cup of coffee, talk to a lawyer, and for most interviews, there's no charge, okay? And I find that an awful lot of people come in to see me, and I'm able to tell them, you really don't need a lawyer today. What you need to do is just go answer that letter and everything will be fine. And I think that helps them. With today's social media and Google and Siri and Alexa and all of those folks, I feel like too many people are getting well-intended advice that's wrong. Okay, and Bubba at the bowling alley is a great guy, but he probably does not understand the IRS code any better than someone else. How does that work into what we're trying to provide for the public with Bailey and Gallion?
Well, the free consultation is twofold. One, we're trying to impart advice and give them understanding of where their case can go or where it couldn't go, right? And you kind of said that, well, hey, this is not something that we can do, but here's something that you can do. At the end of the day, it's all about relationships. Right. And so let's say, for example, that somebody comes in and visits with you or me or whatever, and they don't have a case, and we tell them that they don't have a case, or there's not something that we handle, right? But what ends up happening is they leave that office with a better understanding that, hey, maybe if I do have something in the future that is something that is necessary for me to use the lawyer's office, then I have a resource that I can go and I feel comfortable enough to go back. Because there's plenty of lawyers out there that you walk in the door and they will tell you whatever they can to get you signed up, to get you as a client. And that's not necessarily in the best interest of the client.
Well, or they will promise you the moon. Oh, you bet we're going to go open up a can of whoop 'em on them, and we're your guys. And again, I don't think they're doing their clients any favor. I think, going to court needs to be a sober, well-considered decision. It's expensive, it's gut-wrenching, it takes a long time sometimes. The courts move a little slowly, and of course, since COVID, the courts have kind of gotten backed up a little bit. And has that been as big a problem in the personal injury field as it has in some of the other areas?
Well, I can tell you this. Most personal injury cases, once you file a lawsuit, it's going to be at least 2 years.
Wow.
On average. Because, again, we're not dealing, it's not like on television where, you see that everybody goes to court, everybody gets their thing resolved in an hour. It doesn't work that way. I wish it did sometimes. Oh, yeah. But at the end of the day, we're not dealing with just our schedules. We're dealing with the court schedule. We're dealing with the other side schedule. And there's a lot of moving parts that we can't anticipate, nor could we ever advise a client that it's going to be like within 2 months or 3 months we're going to get to the courtroom. It just doesn't happen that way.
Right. I had a situation like that this week where unexpectedly one of the clients had to have surgery. And it was extensive surgery, and it was going to occasion a delay in the proceedings until they could recover. So sometimes it's stuff completely out of your control. Other times you show up and the judge had a car trouble that day and isn't there.
Had that happen before.
Yeah, and so you're trying to get a whole bunch of people together at the same time to do something can be difficult. And I'm seeing that a lot of folks are trying to do it yourself with downloaded forms and things like that. Because it is expensive and that sort of thing. Going to court is a whole lot more than trying to do your own taxes with TurboTax, okay? There are some things that are just really, really difficult to do. I would not attempt my own appendectomy in the garage and then just go see a doctor if it went south on me, because that's not my skill set, okay? That's why I think these free interviews are so important, because with no risk, you can at least come down and talk to someone who's familiar with that field, familiar with the courts, and can give you some good advice, not necessarily trying to sign you up, but just to give you someone to talk to who's actually been around the block.
A sounding board is always is nice to have.
Do you think we're going to continue doing that in the future?
Absolutely.
Okay. Now, Mr. Bridge is also the chief managing attorney of our law firm, Bailey and Gallion, which means the buck stops with him.
That's right.
So what's that like, James?
Well, hopefully you don't have to have too many interactions with the clients, because you've counseled your staff and employees and attorneys to make sure that they communicated with their clients. But inevitably, people have conflicts, and when those conflicts happen, I usually get myself involved and try to make sure that people understand that it's not personal that we're doing it. It's sometimes, like you said, it's a delay in the courtroom. And people don't appreciate that, and so you have to give them a little bit of counseling and understanding of what's going on. And sometimes it's just a matter of having somebody to talk to.
They say that the dissatisfaction that people most frequently have with either their attorney or their doctor is not enough communication.
Correct.
And so, how do you balance that with the attorneys in terms of helping them communicate with their clients?
Well, it's kind of pretty straightforward. If you don't communicate with your client, then the client will communicate with you at least 3 or 4 more times before you actually call them back. And that's not a good scenario at all. And so always look at it as, if you don't address the problem now, it only becomes worse. And good, bad, or indifferent, if you don't communicate with that client and have that conversation and address, most of the time it's just fear. It's not really that the attorney's not doing what they're supposed to do, or wants to do. They want them to do something that the attorney says they don't want to do. It's more of, I just don't know what's going on, and I would just need somebody to tell me what's going on. And they've been told, but they just need, sometimes people just need handheld.
Sometimes they do.
Right. Unfortunately for the business that we're in, but again, we are attorney and counselors at law, and we have to counsel people sometimes.
Well, and that's kind of to be expected with any field that the client may not be familiar with.
That's right. That's why they're hiring us in the first place.
Absolutely. Well, we again are coming to you today from the Legal Cafe, which is at Main and First Street here in downtown Fort Worth, just across from the courthouse. If you have a question, pop on in, have a cup of coffee, and visit with one of us. It was good to see you today. Thank you.